I want to share with you today a spiritual experience which I have had many, many times in my spiritual direction work with other people, and in also similarly paying attention to my own spiritual life. And I want to share that with you because I think it bears a very close connection with today's gospel, and particularly with the theme in today's gospel where Philip, one of the apostles, says to Jesus, "Show us the Father, and then we will be satisfied." And Jesus says, "What? Don't you know me yet? Anyone who sees me sees the Father. How come you don't get that yet?" Is kind of what he's saying. Now, the background to what I'm going to be sharing with you today, because this is an experience that I've had in my spiritual direction work and in my own spiritual direction work, paying attention to what goes on in someone else's life, and then also paying attention to what goes on in my own life, in my own spiritual life. The background to this is the pastoral care training stuff that I gave you last year. Now, I don't say that to advertise my own work, but simply, I think the homily will make sense anyway, even if you weren't at that, but I think you'll see a lot more depth in it if you were at those sessions. If you weren't, those videos are all available on the Disciples of Jesus YouTube site, 4 videos called Christian Pastoral Listening. Anyway, enough of that. As I said to you in those sessions, the main approach that I take when I'm doing this sort of work, and which I invite you to do also when you're doing your pastoral care with one another, is when I approach a person to seek to work with that person on his or her spiritual life, I don't seek to bring any wisdom of my own or to help that person in any way or to tell that person what I think is going on. The only thing that I do is to simply pay attention to what is there, to listen to what is going on, and to look for what God is already doing in that person's soul. And that's the only thing. And that's the whole thing. To pay attention to what is happening, and then wait for God to show up. Now, one of the things that I've noticed many, many, many times doing this with other people and doing it in my paying attention to my own life is that very often what we see when we look deeply into someone's soul is we see something very, very similar to the crucified Christ. I'm going to say that again because it's pretty shocking. When we look into the depths of people's souls, very often what we will see is something very similar to the crucified Christ. Now, if that surprises you, or if you find yourself thinking, "Nah, I don't think I believe that." Okay, I'm going to say it even more. Even further, I'm going to push it even further. I am almost 100% certain that there is something in you, in every single person here, which is basically a reflection of the crucified Christ, of Jesus on the cross. There is that kind of pain deep down in everybody's souls. There is. I've seen it countless times. And if you hear that and you think, "Gee, that's a bit far-fetched, that's pushing it a bit far, there isn't that sort of pain in my life or in most people's lives," I am pretty sure the reason for that is that it's so awful that we don't look and we don't see. We are very, very, very much like the apostles on Good Friday. When the cross came, what did they do? They ran away because they couldn't cope. And that is what we do psychologically. That is what we all do. That is what everybody on the planet does We cannot face what is in our souls because it literally is that kind of pain, that kind of abandonment. We cannot face it, and there's no blame associated with that because we can't. I mean, Jesus says, either in this gospel or immediately before it, where I am going, you cannot come. So Jesus understands that this is pushing us a bit too far. But the reality is that we have that kind of crucified one within us. But the other thing, that when we look at what is going on in our own souls or someone else's souls and we don't turn away, and we are totally honest about it, and we do not reject any pain because that pain is real and it is your experience. The other thing that we almost invariably see, and I've seen it so many times, is God is already there in the midst of that. He is already healing. He is already transforming. He is already bringing light. And the reason that we don't see that, I mean, most times we don't see that either because we're not looking. Because the crucified one within us is too scary and too awful, so we turn away from what is within us, and therefore we do not find that healing, miraculous, almighty power of God and the Holy Spirit, which is at work in our souls. Also, we don't find that because we're not looking, because we're not paying attention, because we've been scared off by the cross. But if we do look, and if we do not turn away, I've seen it so many times, that healing power of God, that power of God to raise the suffering one up and give him or her life, is there. It's already there in people's lives. When I was preparing this, it came to mind a session that I was having with somebody quite recently, and we were looking at the agony in his life, the sense of abandonment and confusion and discouragement and sin and sinful kind of struggle and disorder. And as we were looking at that, what emerged was something that really looked very much like a father. And we could recognise that. It was a fatherly kind of care and authority and protection and empowerment, encouragement, did I say that? Enlightenment, clarity. We found all those things happening in his soul. And I said to him something like, as I often do in my work, what does that look like to you? What does God look like? And he said, yeah, he looks like a father. And I could see as I was working with him, I could see from the way that he was talking that inside himself he's saying, oh my goodness, this is really what I need. This is what I want. How can I keep hold of this? How can I make sure that I don't lose this and fall back into that awfulness that I've been in? How can I make sure that this takes hold in my life? So I said to him, I'm not going to use his name, let's call him Fred. Fred, how do we get there? Like, you know, because we were both kind of surprised as we're looking at this fatherly healing power that had emerged in the midst of his struggle. We were both, you know, because I didn't make that happen. It just happened. Came out of nowhere. And I said, Fred, how do we get there? And he kind of hummed and hawed and he gave a few, like he couldn't really answer the question. So I said to him, look, what we did, we didn't go looking for that. We didn't go trying to get hold of the healing or get hold of the power or get hold of the encouragement or get hold of the enlightenment. We just looked at the suffering one. And the healing, the empowering, the fatherly love just appeared. And he said to me, yeah, that is what's happening. Yeah, I can see that. I can see that that's what happened. And I was saying that to him because I was wanting to make a really important point, which I would make to you now. If you want to see the power of God in your life, you don't go trying to get hold of the power of God. If you want to see that power, you go looking for the crucified one. And the power of God shows up. The fatherly healing shows up. Not when we try to get hold of it or go after it, but when we go after the crucified one. The Father is there. Now, doesn't that sound very much like what Jesus says in this gospel? He who sees me sees the Father. He who sees me sees the Father. Now, that's not normally how we interpret that text, is it? Normally, when we hear that, the one who sees me sees the Father, we think to ourselves, and this is true, but it's only one part of the truth and we don't see the other part. But normally we think to ourselves, Jesus is the physical embodiment of the wisdom of God and the mercy of God and the compassion of God and the healing of God and the power of God and all of that, right? Yeah? So if we want to see the personality of the hidden God, we look at the personality of the human Christ. Yes? That's how we normally read that. If you want to see the Father, look at me. And I think that's perfectly true. But what encourages me in what I'm saying to you today is the context in which Jesus says this. Do you remember? When does Jesus say this? The one who sees me sees the Father. Less than 24 hours before he's on the cross, right? At the Last Supper, he's just going to the cross. In fact, in an hour's time, he'll be in the Garden of Gethsemane in agony. Okay? Now, I want you to imagine that you're one of the disciples and you've got these words ringing in your ear. Whoever sees me sees the Father. And then you're looking at Jesus on the cross. What? Doesn't really look like God to me. Does it look like God to you? Not really. In fact, it looks like someone who's been abandoned by God, doesn't it? It looks like the absolute, utter, complete, total opposite of God, doesn't it? One who has been abandoned by God and God is not there. That's what it looks like. And yet we know what happened shortly afterwards, don't we? So we know from that history and from all our theology and from every Eucharist, if you want to see the most awesome and world-defining, and superlatives fail me, inbreaking of God into the world, where do you got to look? At the cross. If you want to see the Father, have a look at the Son, and specifically have a look at the Son on the cross, because that's where the Father is about to show up, isn't it? He who sees me sees the Father. You see a deeper meaning in that now than you've seen before? I might put it in different ways. If you want to find the resurrection in your life, again, you don't go after the resurrection. Nobody can get hold of the resurrection. Nobody can pursue the resurrection. If you want the resurrection in your life, you go after the cross. That's where the resurrection comes. And you're all going to accept that in theory, aren't you? And it's pretty theology. But I don't want to leave it there. If you want to see the resurrection power of God, if you want to see the Father at work in your life, you have a look for the crucified one within you. And you will find what Jesus is saying here. The one who sees me sees the Father.